afternoon. I'd like to call this meeting to order with a moment of silence and the pledge by Ms. Bounds.
Thank you. Please stand for a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please salute. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have a few announcements. The board met in executive session this afternoon at 4:15 with representatives from the law department. Mr. Dubler, would you care to expound on our executive session as public information?
Yes.
Why we have those?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under a couple different cases in Tennessee, Smith County Education Association versus Anderson and Van Hoosier versus Warren County, the board and really any board across the state may meet with its attorney or attorneys in this case with the law department and discuss litigation or pending litigation. The board is not allowed to deliberate, and the board did not deliberate in our executive session. It was simply a time for our department to discuss litigation, and that's it.
Thank you, sir. Since this week is being celebrated across Tennessee as School Board Appreciation Week, I wanted to express our appreciation as a board for the wonderful snacks from the superintendent and his staff that they provided for us, and to my fellow board members. Thank you all for your service and all that you do for our students. The TSBA Legislative and Legal Institute, which is taking place of the former Day on the Hill, will be held in Nashville at the downtown Doubletree on February 17th and 18th. I know several of us are attending, but if you have not let Terry know and you would like to attend, the registration deadline is February 3rd. Also, the NSBA annual conference is quickly approaching on April 3rd through the 6th in Chicago. Again, if you have not let Terry know, but you would like to attend, please let her know as quickly as possible. Also, board members, we had a couple of school visits scheduled for Friday morning. We will postpone those to a later date since we are closed for illness, and we'll let you know on that date as soon as possible. Do we have any changes to this agenda? Okay, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Norman, a second by Ms. Satterfield. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, and I'd like to refer to Superintendent Thomas for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. In this report, I'd like to do something a little different than usual. Many of you know that this is School Board Appreciation Week in Tennessee, and I wanted to take a brief moment to say thank you to our board members for all the tremendous work that you do, but I also think that tonight's a great opportunity to remind everyone of some specific achievements that our board accomplished in the last year. So often we wrap up one task and immediately move on to the next one. I think it's important every once in a while to look back and say thank you to our board members for all they've accomplished for the district. With that in mind, here are just a few things our board did in 2019. First, I know that our employees remain grateful for the 4% raise that was part of this year's budget. It had been more than a decade since teachers and staff had gotten a raise that large, and it was much needed affirmation of the efforts of our teachers and our staff. Last year also saw approval of 3 new elementary schools in Knox County. These schools will have a significant impact not only in 2 communities that need replacement buildings, but also in northwest Knox County where a brand new school will be built. In addition to 3 new schools, there were some major renovations at 2 other schools. And last year, completed renovations at Inskip, and those that went to the ribbon cutting, not a brand new facility, but renovations that certainly were an improvement to Inskip Elementary School. Of course, one of the biggest responsibilities our board undertakes is managing our finances. Not only did the board approve this year's budget include spending from our general purpose fund, our capital budget, our federal programs budget totaling approximately $605 million, but also went the extra mile to advocate for the district. Last April, several board members traveled to Nashville and visited with Governor Bill Lee to talk about education funding more broadly. In making the case for a state system that more effectively meets the needs of our district, they were planting seeds that we hope will bear much fruit in the future. Finally, of course, there are the everyday sacrifices of time and energy that go into the work of education. Our board members reviewed dozens and dozens of district policies and attended 30 board meetings in 2019. In addition to the regular session and work session meetings, they took part in committee meetings, executive sessions, state-level conferences, and many school visits. Some of those meetings generated a lot of attention, of course, but much of this work is done quietly and steadily with little fanfare. Even so, I just want to acknowledge how important this work is. By giving their time, your time, and the effort, our board members make it possible for teachers to teach and for principals to lead and our classified staff to support the work of education. Also, the superintendent appreciates all the constructive criticism that's provided to me to help me guide the work of the district, and I certainly mean that sincerely. I do appreciate the feedback that I'm given and the direction that I'm given from our board. That really helps me and helps the staff. So thank you for that, and I'm sure here this spring, in a couple of months, you'll be giving me some more feedback at evaluation. But anyway, we have plenty of important business tonight, but please join me in expressing our thanks to the Knox County Board of Education. Thank you so much. We appreciate everything that you do and all the work that you do. It's just it's amazing what you do and what you accomplish, and I know our teachers, our principals appreciate it, and all the decisions are based on what's best for our students and our teachers, our staff, and you do a remarkable job, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Thomas. We really appreciate, I think I probably speak for everyone when I say we appreciate you going through that. It's important to look back and to remember some of the good things that have happened over the last year. So that's a nice thing to do. Thank you so much. Okay, and now we'll move into our legislative update with Ms. Owen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hear me okay?
No,
How about now?
I think so. Try it.
How about now?
There you go.
Okay. The legislature is still looking at. I'm into it. You tell me I'm not loud enough? Maybe if I don't have the mic, I can be louder. The legislature has until February 5th to file legislation. So we don't know all of the things that may come out yet, but they are trickling down slowly. So by next week, we should know any new legislation that's going to be filed. One thing they are looking at, they are still looking at elementary PE time. They have recently heard testimony in favor of elementary PE twice per week for 45 minutes, claiming that it would not cost any more to any district in the state. And they said that that's because Tennessee has more PE teachers than elementary schools. And so there is a belief out there that because we have, exactly, there's a belief out there that because we have more than one PE teacher per elementary school in the state, that they should be able to easily teach all of the students in that school twice per week. So class is working with us on this, and we are trying to show them how our related arts schedules actually work and how our phys ed schedules work. And Renee Kelly was on that call with us, and so we have gotten together some elementary schedules, and we're going to work on showing those to the legislature so they will understand exactly how the math really works, instead of that just one PE teacher should be able to do all of that. So that's what we're working on there. Of course, the budget is always an issue, and we know that we can't advocate for more funding all by ourselves as a board. So there are plans to bring together communities, parents, teachers, students, and boards all across the state. And to tell you what is going on and what those plans are, I would like to turn it to Tanya Coates from KCEA.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Jennifer Owen, for allowing us to present the PowerPoint that it's 4 minutes and 46 seconds of how we need your help to help us raise the funding for the state of Tennessee.
It's affordable, it's right, it's time to fund Tennessee schools. Our fight for the funding we deserve. State officials often use state rankings to show how Tennessee schools are doing. Thanks to the work of
Well, you may
Tennessee
not be able to hear
educators,
it,
Tennessee
so I can go
leads
through it
in many
myself.
important academic outcomes and statistics. Yet
So I
one
can do it
state
myself.
ranking is never touted
So
by the
as
governor or
most
state
of you may not know,
officials.
that the state of Tennessee is
45th in the
ranked
nation in
number
funding per
is
student.
45th in
We're in the
funding for
bottom
students
10.
across the state. So it's, my president is talking voice over this. And to be 45th is very challenging for us. To be ranked 45th out of 50 states, out of the United States, of how we fund our teachers across the state of Tennessee. Most of you may not know that, I know that's going really fast now, but the PowerPoint before it says that most schools do not have librarians, they don't have PE teachers, or they don't have the related arts funds. So this exacerbates some of the work that our teachers have to do across the state, where it's less time to teach, where it's scarcity aligned with the materials, and high faculty turnover, discipline problems, and absenteeism, as you're going to talk about that today. Tennessee teachers spend on an average about $500 out of their pocket. That's just the minimum. Most teachers spend well over $1,000 in regards to how much they spend, what they spend out of their pocket for students. And we know that the money is there. It also talks about, in this PowerPoint, which I'm going to keep up with it on my, I'm going to have to pull it up myself, since you can't hear it, that this, so based on the funds in the South, we're talking about how much that we spend per student. We spend about $10,120 per student across the state. That is the lowest. And when we talk about how much we spend on for students, it's really sad when we might beat Mississippi in football, but it's really bad when we have to say for students, where the state of Mississippi spends about $10,032. So in percentage-wise, for the state's funds over our neighborhoods, we spend at 46%. While our neighboring states, again, thanks to Mississippi, they're below us, but we spend 40% of our money is spent on that. Again, I want to reiterate that that's 45th out of 50 states that we spend this money, that we spend our money on. And so all states, all other states or rankings in comparison are good for the state of Tennessee. The national average for fourth graders and eighth graders in the math and reading scores, where the top half of the state is average, the ACT scores, we are above that, where Tennessee is nationally known with its leadings for K-12 improvement. We're 8th ranked in on-time graduation, and we're the 5th national for black students. But yet still, we're 45th out of the nation of how much we spend on funding. Leading the South on-time graduation, we have 90.2% of our students in the state of Tennessee that are graduating on time. That is very phenomenal for our students for the state of Tennessee. But when we're graduating at that rate and we still can't pay to actually fund our students, that's a shame on us. So beside the funding for that, again, it is $10,120. I just want to reiterate that, how much we spend on per student. But how can we fix that? We can fix that with just a gap of being $1.2 billion behind of what we spend on funding for our kids. What does that equate to? That is less than $1,200 per student that we can add to our our state's budget. And so most of you may not know that in our revenue, there was $5.5 billion that is in our revenues that's been sitting in our state's revenues at the State Department. It's just sitting there. But again, remember, we're 45th and we're not willing to help our kids. So in order to do that, if we give that to our kids, that from 2015 to 2019, the state has $3 billion of under-budget revenue that has been in there. That's the same period amount of $359 million of teacher salary. You see where we can help out with the salaries when we're asking just for 4%? Because state funding is so low, states need to such great school needs and many Tennessee teachers have little or no raises in the last 5 years. And so that's why you've seen over the nation where teachers have been doing the Red for Ed marches, there have been states that teachers have not gotten raises for 10 years. But we have the revenue. Just remember, we have that revenue. That growth has doubled in our budget. It has doubled over the year. Just this past year, they added a $1.2 billion to that revenue that is just sitting there for us to use. The state has the revenue, and it's time for them to give it to us, and we're asking you to help us do that. The time is now to act for more funding. The BEP is not as simple as they say it is, or the state says it is, because they're holding the money, and it's time. The time is, it's affordable. It's time for them to help us, to help you as the Knox County School Board, to help fund public education. And doing that, we're having a rally on March the 16th. We're asking all school board, anyone that has an interest in public education, to make sure that we get the funding we deserve, and that will be at 12 noon. And the great thing is, it's on spring break, so we're not asking teachers to walk out of the classroom, because we're going to ask our students to walk with us because they need this funding. And if you would like to register and go with us and be on Capitol Hill and ask our legislators for the funding that we deserve, we ask you just to text the number 84693 and register for it. We are giving free shirts away. We're going to have 3 buses here in Knox County, just the minimum of 3 buses. But if we have over hundreds of thousands of people that are willing to go with us to the state capitol to ask for the funding, the monies that they have at the state level to give to schools and fund us more than 46%, we ask you to help us to do that. And I thank you for allowing us to give you that report.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and now I'm going to introduce Brian Hartzell. Is Brian here? There he is, for our discipline data presentation.
I tried.
You're trying to hide?
Madam Chair, may I say something before you start?
Yes, Ms. Satterfield?
Yes, Board, I just want to say that I sit on the DOE task force, and I asked, they shared this data with us last month, and there were some community members that's kind of been going back and forth about how to present the data, because we do have a desire to have a community meeting with the public, but I asked the district to come and present this data to the board as well, so you can kind of see where we're at with discipline, and hopefully continue to put the resources that we need in the areas that we need them.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Satterfield. Okay, Mr. Hartzell.
Good evening, Madam Chair, board members, superintendent, Mr. Thomas. You all have a packet before you, and what I would like to do is, first off, thank you for the opportunity to come before you and present this data information to you. Also, ask that you understand that this is a work in progress. Our primary goal when dealing with discipline or issuing discipline is to maintain order and a safe atmosphere in our school, so that the the environment in our school is conducive to learning. All right, at this time, if we could please look at the first slide. Basically, the first slide is just a breakdown of the demographics here in Knox County schools. Also, when we presented to the DOE steering committee a month ago, when evaluating the numbers, reviewing the numbers, we noticed, and you all may have heard, that the first presentation we gave, there was some confusion in the numbers that we shared with them. So therefore, when we go to the second page of the packet that you received, those numbers will represent the actual numbers. Now, I will remind you that those are records. When we say records, those are a collection of events that took place within the school. Those do not identify or account for any particular student or student involvement. Those are strictly records, not students. All right, so if you would, please go to the second page with us. All right, on this slide, you will notice that on the left-hand side of the slide is our high school, out-of-school suspensions. On our right side is our middle school out-of-school suspension, and you see, just looking at the numbers, there is a seesaw effect, but keep in mind that in 2016-17, we did go to a new policy far as it relates to discipline, and also some of our schools at that time were implementing and piloting the restorative practices in the buildings. And then you notice that in last year's data, 18-19, that both middle and high school suspension rates were elevated from the previous year. Really there's no justification for that other than just the fact of the new rulings, the new policies that went in place. Both principals as well as students were having a hard time adjusting to the new policies. But I would also keep in mind the information doesn't show on this screen, but the goal in implementing those new policies were to cut down on the disparities in education. And I believe if you look at when we come back again to present numbers to you and we dive into those more deeply, we will have the instructional impact that the days out of school showed. In this presentation, we do not have those, but in implementing those new policies, we did cut down on the number of days that students were actually out of school. And for an example, on our new policies, our original policies, students were suspended for, say, an assault on a fellow class member. The maximum days was 90 days. When we went to our new policies, we cut those down to 45 days. So that means that was cut in half from being out of school, possible 90 days. A student was now only missing 45 days of instructional time. And also, I would ask you all to keep in mind that here in Knox County, we call them suspensions. However, no student is out of school without some form of education. Every student that is suspended 10 days or more out of school is offered some form of alternative placement. Are they mandated to go? No. However, they are offered, and we have alternative school for our middle and high school at Richard Yoakley during the day, and also Ridgedale during the day. And then for other students suspended 90 days or less, we have our night school alternative programs also at Richard Yoakley and Byington Solway. All right, if we go to the next slide. The next slide is our ISS numbers. ISS, which stands for in-school suspensions. Once again, if you look at our high school numbers, our in-school suspension rate, it does show a decrease. However, when looking at those numbers, also remember that at the high school level, we were implementing our restorative classrooms at that time, where students, instead of going to in-school suspension, we were sending them to restorative learning centers. And if you go to the other side, the right-hand side, the middle school, once again, we see a decrease in the number of students being placed in school suspension as well. And once again, that would be because of the introduction of our restorative learning centers. Next slide, please. The next slide is an actual illustration of our learning center student activity or records that will be shown. And you can see an increase of the number of students going into the restorative learning center. And once again, the restorative learning center is a four-step prong approach, whereas the student is receive the consequences for whatever action or whatever infraction they broke, far as the school policy, school rule, but then there's a restorative piece that restores them back to the classroom after receiving that, lack of a better word, punitive consequence for their action. Next slide, please. All right, this slide here at the top portion of the slide is a breakdown of a 3-year period of each high school's suspension rate.
Mr. Harsel.
Yes.
Board Chair. Also, because this was this was a slide that kind of piqued a lot of people's interest at the DOE task force meeting, but I just also want to reiterate the 406 of the number of records. So this essentially could be a handful of kids causing the highest suspension rates.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, that is correct. Once again, as I stated earlier, these are records, not individual students. So one student, Brian Hartzell, could be on this numerous times. And each incident that I got in trouble every day, I could be the cause at, I'm going to say my alma mater, Austin East, for all those different things on there. So just keep in mind, it's not individual students. These are actual records. So one student could be the cause for all of them, or 3 or 4 students could be the cause of all those different suspensions at one school. And the delay is just to give you an opportunity to review them and look at the numbers and whatnot. All right, then if you look at the bottom portion of that same slide or on your paper, it's just a breakdown of the 18-19, a blown up portion of that 18-19 school year. Next slide, please. And the next slide is the same information, just at the middle school level. School by school at the top for the past 3 years, and then the bottom is a breakout of the 18-19 school year. All right, next slide, please. The next slides will be pie charts that will show you the breakdown of subgroups by subgroups of the number of suspensions issued based on subgroups, and the reasoning for the top, I believe it's top 5 reasoning for those suspensions in those subgroups. And the subgroups at the top would be the white subgroup. The second subgroup will be the blacks. The Hispanics is the third. And then we'll go to the next page.
Ryan, can I ask you a question?
Where are we coming from?
Right here, sorry.
Okay, excuse me.
So on the ISS, the top incident is a class cut. So I'm assuming that they would get ISS, and then if they kept doing that, then they would probably get out of school suspension, which is why it's a smaller piece of the pie on the out of school suspension. Would you assume that's correct? Okay. Thank you. Anybody have a question so far? Okay.
This page 9. Once again, they just fall in order. The first page was the subgroups, OSS, out of school suspension. The next page would have been ISS by the subgroups, and then the next page is the restorative learning centers by subgroups.
Ask you a question. So is ISS and restorative learning centers both simultaneously going on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the answer to that question is yes. However, as we redefined and learn our different positions as we reposted some things or reorganized some things within the system. ISS, the plan is for ISS to disappear, and Restorative Learning Center will be the center where we send kids instead of ISS.
And do we feel like at our high schools and middle schools that it's being implemented the same way, or is it very different? If you saw how it was implemented, is it different at every high school?
As we speak today, yes, it's implemented differently at each school. However, the goal is to bring everyone into conformity. All right, if we go to the next page, it's the same information. However, it's at the middle school level. Broken down by subgroups. OSS on page 10, out-of-school suspensions by subgroups, white at the top, black in the middle, and Hispanics at the bottom. Page 11 would be the in-school suspensions, broken out by the same format subgroups. And then page 12 would be the restorative learning centers by the same format subgroups. All right, if we go to page 13, a little more information here. These are 5 days or more suspensions out of school by incidents and the top 5 categories that the students receive those consequences. Then page 14, we're on that page now, we look at these numbers. These are actual students who have been suspended. Total number of students for 15, 16, 3680, 17, 18, 34, 20.
You did. Yeah, we can't hear you.
Presentation to the DOE, the number of records did not change. However, the category in which they were reported changed. Instead of the incidents being shown at the middle school level, they all went to the high school level. Like the number of records remained the same, let's say 3,800. However, the distribution of those records changed. They should have probably been split, let's just say half and half. 1,900 should have been at the middle school level, 1,900, and I'm just doing it evenly, should have been at the high school level. However, they did not do that. It showed a decline at the high school level and an increase in the Yes, an increase in the middle school level, whereas the reasoning for that in the methodology that was used to pull the numbers, the students were shown at the next building or the next grade level instead of pulling them at the grade level where the incident took place. And I believe Mr. Thomas explained that to you all prior to in an email he sent out. And then over here on the side, if you see the numbers in the pink, and I'm gonna ask Mr. Little to come up and make sure I explain this correctly, if you would, please. The pink indicates increase. The pink is an increase and the green is a decrease. Okay, and there's a minus on there. I've been fighting off glasses, so that's why I can't see that fine print. But I'm coming. I'm getting around to it soon. All right, if we go to the next slide. Once again, the previous slide was out-of-school suspension. These here are in-school suspension numbers.
But is this including the restorative part in this?
No, it's not included in this. That's why you see a decrease in the numbers, is because more schools were using at this time restorative instead of in-school suspension. So therefore, the decrease in in-school suspension numbers. Finally, I'd like to make you all aware of a new initiative that will help us hopefully put a stamp on this discipline policies and also discipline data information. Mr. Thomas has given me the chair position of a new committee that we're formulating to go to schools and meet with principals and meet with their administrative team to look at their data, review the data, monthly data reports with them, and see what type of changes need to be made, what kind of thinking outside the box, what kind of being proactive activities we can do to decrease discipline, however maintaining order and safety within the school. And there was a question mentioned about the ISS and in-school suspension, restorative practices. As of right now, we have two high schools that are using restorative practice and in-school suspension. We have one middle school that is using restorative center and in-school suspension. And then there's two schools that are in the process of trying to hire a in-school suspension person, which they're using their other funding to purchase those resources, to maintain those resources. At this time, I will be glad to take any questions.
Ms. Owen, did you have a question?
Yes. Do we have plans to see the elementary data in the future?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And once again, when we presented this to DEO, we did not include the elementary, so therefore, and it was stated that present this information that was presented to them, so that's why we did not include the elementary data.
Okay. Do we have other questions? Ms. Hill?
Brian, did I hear you say that the goal was to eventually eliminate ISS in the schools and to have totally the restorative practices?
Yes, that is our goal. I want to make sure I'm saying this right before I put that out there.
Ms. Cook?
Because I think I just hear you say that you were trying to hire two ISS people?
The schools, the goal is schools feel that ISS is the punitive way to deal with the behavior. However, they don't feel that the restorative is the two schools that we're talking of don't feel that restorative, that kids are quite ready to go into restorative. They need some ISS time to get the correct behavior and get their mindset right before they go into the restorative classroom.
So the two positions you said that they're looking to hire are two more schools then that will be adding the two separate, that will have the two standalone?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Our goal in moving forward is to look at ISS as
at this point, we're looking, we have this structure set up. I mean, there's schools that are doing that right now. So but as we look, we're looking to see what do we need to do to stop the behavior? Because that's the end goal, is to get the kids to be able to access their education in a safe way. So when we look at what we're doing, some schools have chosen that ISS route at this point in time. They feel like the restorative part, that the kids need to just stop for a moment before they move into the restorative portion of it. So I think that we're going to review that and look at that as we go on to audit exactly what's going on with each of the schools, and what we need to put in place to support the staff that's there so that we can get the kids back on track, have them learn the skills that they need to learn, so that hopefully we don't have recidivism, that we can keep them out of. They may be there once, but let's hope that they don't come back.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Cook.
Thank you.
I'd just like to comment that how much I appreciate this report, but also recognize that we all share the same goal, and that is to have our schools be a safe place. And I mean, looking at the majority of suspensions being for fighting, I mean, there are behaviors that are justifiable, that cannot be tolerated. And I appreciate that we're trying to get at the root of the behavior, but appreciate the fact too that our principals and our staffs cannot be everywhere and be everything to everyone, and that we still do deal with these behaviors, and that
forward, there may be an increase. There may be an increase in the number of suspensions that we have due to the fact of the new policy that we just put in place as it relates to vaping. So those numbers, moving forward, will show an increase just based on that. And understand our vaping committee, I guess that's what we call ourselves, looked at this from a not from a punitive standpoint, from the standpoint of educating students, because, as you all may recall, 3 or 4 years ago, we thought vaping was a safe alternative to smoking. So therefore, now we're dealing with kids that are addicted, so therefore we need to educate them and then find ways, outside resources that we can bring in to help relieve that addiction. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry, do we have more questions? Mr. Norman has a question.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
okay. Thank you. Thanks, Brian. I guess, of course, the fundamental question is, what are we doing? Are we doing a good job at changing behavior, getting more people to behave and learn and so on? So when we start the restorative practice stuff, obviously it's not working probably for some kids. It just depends on the kind of kid. So obviously some schools are choosing to modify that with ISS or whatever. So do we have some way to measure effectiveness of restorative practice now?
And I'm going to refer that question, if I may, to Ms. Cook.
Okay.
All righty.
All right.
Thank you, Ms. Cook.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if we're looking at restorative practices, putting one person in a school is not going to make a difference, and we kind of put one restorative person in the school. So what we're looking at right now, we have some schools that have a team, and we're looking at a team process where we have a liaison, an interventionist, and an assistant, and we're looking to see, is that process, is that what it's going to take to help us turn the ship and look at change the behaviors. We had one, we pulled up during our DEO meeting, we just pulled up, there's a question asked, and we pulled up that at one of our schools where we have that team, up until this point, there was 1,600 contacts that the restorative liaison team had with kids. Whether that was a 5-minute stop and let's just touch base and make sure we're in the right place kind of intervention that was put in place so that the kid is maybe going into the class in a better place than they were. Maybe supporting the teacher by pulling the and that is and they don't have skills, you're not really going to move it. We need to have a process that we know is going to work before we say we need, 500 new people or whatever, to come and do this work. We're looking at what's going to work. So there's restorative interventions in 6 of our schools that at this point we're really monitoring the data real closely to see, is this the structure that we need to monitor and see progress?
Okay. In the old days, what we would say would be something like, if we could take and change 5 kids' behavior in this school, it would totally change the school. So what I wonder about is some of the tougher kids, for lack of a better term, I wonder about the approach of a restorative practice on those. Is this really working? Is this really helpful to them? And how are we going to know? Or are they putting us through the works, so to speak, and playing the game, and they're going to wear us out anyway? And so I'm just wondering about the notion of 5 or 6 kids in a lot of schools. That's where 80 or 90% of the problem is. And what about the identification of those kids? They need help. I'm not condemning them. I'm just saying they may need a whole different level. And restorative practice may be way too, I don't know, nice, cuddly, warm, I don't know. But you know what I'm saying. There's just some things, some people just kind of, poo-poo, and this isn't going to work. So I'm wondering about that. Then the only other thing, Brian mentioned vaping, and I would hope that you would separate out suspension information about vaping. You've got behavioral issues, and then you've got other issues. The behavioral issues are the critical issues that we've got to, that's where the improvement needs to be made. Yeah. Thanks.
Ms. Owen, did you have a question? Go ahead.
A different thing for just a minute. Could someone talk to PBA about the microphone situation? Because
Which
every
Ms. Coatney
meeting
has
that I've
talked to
been
them
in,
several
whether it's
times.
commission or city council, it seems to be getting worse and worse.
Mm-hmm. Ms.
So-
Coatney has had several conversations, so I'm sure she'll address it again.
I was sure someone had.
I think
but-
we need, one thing I will say, I think we need to be, these chairs, that the height of the chair, you can hit the button, and if you hit that button, that could be it. So just watch your chair on the button, for one thing, try that.
Okay, and so on this, if we could in the future see a comparison also, besides just the change in percentage of suspensions, if we could also see the change in the student population, I think that would be valuable information to have, because we may see an increase in a subgroup but not know that that subgroup has 1,000 more students in it this year than it did in the past. So I think that would be useful for us in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, that's a good suggestion. Anything else? Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, and we're going to turn now to budget. We have Joe Snyder, our budget director, will come and present to us the 2021 budget update and staffing information. Do we need to take a recess? No? Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, board members, Mr. Superintendent. I do want to mention before we get started, I noticed on the agenda that I think items 8 and 9 reference budget and then staffing. This is actually one line item, so hopefully get you through a little quicker this evening.
Okay.
We plan to cover both budget and staffing in this presentation. So the intent of this, just primarily based on where we are in the process right now, is to give you a general overview of where we are in the process. In that overview, we'll look at revenues to the extent that we know revenues right now, and then look a little deeper at expenditures. Then we'll transition to some staffing conversation because that's the meat of what's going on right now, and then also end by looking at important dates and timelines that are coming up. And so I know this is hard to read, but I know you guys have seen this at the board retreat and over the last couple of years. I use this just to kind of circle in, and the red area there just basically points at where we are right now in the process. The student enrollment part and staffing part, and again, you're aware of this, but I just want to point a few things out. We received the enrollment projections from our attendance or our enrollment and transfer office. We have those currently. We're working with our grade level directors, Mr. Thomas's staff, and looking at the ratios that allocate teachers and assistant principals and other staff members out. And then that begins that process in terms of the end of that would be the staffing section, which is the second part underneath the red highlighted area, which is where we begin meeting with principals. And that's going to happen in a couple of weeks, and to begin to talk to them about what does your staffing potentially look like for the next school year. The bottom part of it, at the same time, concurrently, we are, of course, meeting daily with our internal departments, all of our subject area departments, content areas, as well as maintenance, operations, transportation. And in those meetings, we're just listening to what their budgetary asks and needs are. And Joni and I try to quantify those and make sure that we have good documentation on that and present that to you guys and Mr. Thomas for any decisions to be made on that. And so again, I just wanted to start with that and kind of show you where we are. The last thing I'll point out on this, if you look down at the bottom, and you all are familiar with the March 20th or so deadline is that's when we reach out to you guys individually and ask you to come in and let's talk through the budget, staffing, and get your concern and your feedback with that. So we'll look at the first part of this, which is, again, the budget overview, and we know the budget is really two budgets, the revenue budget and the expenditure budget. The revenue budget is, at this point, we're still early in that process, and you all have heard us talk about this historically. The issue we have is we have a budget presented to you guys to vote on in April, and April is really the first hard copy we get from the BEP, if you will, that says, or from the state that says, here's your projected BEP revenue. The BEP number for 2020, which is our current fiscal year, we highlighted that one in red just because it was a bit of an anomaly from the prior 3 to 5 year trends we were seeing. And so we're a bit anxious about that one at this point, just waiting to see is that hopefully a 1 year anomaly, and that revenue is a bit lower. And I know, as someone said earlier, I know you guys have been talking with legislators and the governor's office, and hopefully that does not become a trend over the next few years. Hopefully BEP revenues increase back to the level that we were used to prior to this current year. And the sales tax side of that, fortunately this year was the opposite. If you look at 2018, 2019, there was not much of an increase at all. And for the current fiscal year, we saw a $10 million budgeted increase in our sales tax revenues. So that was really obviously a pleasant surprise for us. And then property taxes, as you all know, again, is relatively flat compared to the more dynamic movement within sales tax and the BEP revenue. The one number from this chart that we can predict, even though we don't know BEP, but we can look at sales tax revenue, and our staff, Chris Simons and his staff, do a great job of taking current year, and what this slide represents is current year sales tax collections from September. So the collections at the bottom, you see two dates down there, but the September collections represent, or the September number represents the July collections. And so the last one we received, which would have been the report we received from the county in January, this shows the actual November collections. And as you know, based on just economics, the December number is really an important number, and we'll be getting that number in the next couple of weeks. I'll just point out here, the fiscal year 20, the purple line, if you look at that one compared to the last 2 fiscal years, obviously it's continuing to increase. I don't know an exact dollar figure off the top of my head now, but I want to say we're somewhere, maybe 4 million or so, trending in a positive direction so far this year. If this trend continues past December, then hopefully, and Ron and his team meet with Chris Caldwell, and they reach a number that they are comfortable budgeting for fiscal year 21, and that's where the sales tax projection revenue comes from. So once we get past the those couple of items, we look at what's coming up that helps us determine what the revenue is. I believe February the 3rd, which is next Monday, I believe, is Governor Lee's State of the State address. And we take that address, and historically they release a preliminary budget in that address. And so we take it back into just some numbers that based on historical trends for Knox County that we've received out of that. And we try to estimate at that point how much state revenue do we anticipate. Again, hopefully that number is higher than the little bit over $7 million we received in new revenue last year. And then I'll just say it again, April was really the first real indication we will have in terms of how much BEP revenue we would receive. Local taxes, again, we're monitoring those right now month to month, and as well as doing trend analysis based on the last several years for weighted averages that we use there, and conversations that we'll have with Chris Caldwell, and hopefully begin to settle on a number closer to April. As those numbers evolve, of course, we'll communicate those to Mr. Thomas, and he'll communicate those out to you guys just to keep you abreast of any revenue changes. So I guess the story there is, if I was to sum revenues up, is we don't really know what we're going to get. All we can do is based on, look at trends, say here's what we have been getting. Let's hope this continues. And so what we spend a lot of our efforts on right now are on this side of the budget, which is building the expenditure budget. And so we were talking earlier, it's kind of like going shopping and trying to buy things, but not really being sure you even have the money to buy it. So that's the dynamic at play in building the expenditure budget. And as you all know, there are three main components to building this expenditure budget are the district priorities, which, of course, the board and superintendent state and are based on, the increasing student achievement, eliminating disparities, and creating positive cultures. And so we ask that, any departmental budgets, that's the second component of this, to make sure any requests they make in their budgets tie back to those district priorities and strategic plan. And then the last part of it is the staffing allocation. I do want to show you quickly just a sheet that you're all familiar with from prior budgets. This, you can see a lot of blanks on it. And so this is just to give you an idea of where we are in the process. And the top two items that we continue to put up there just based on, again, superintendent and the board's initiatives would be salary scale adjustments and textbooks. Those two things are not going to go away. And so at this point, I don't have a price or a projected impact out there for, last year we started off saying a 4% is approximately this. What we're doing right now, just so you have an idea, is we're taking last year's projected impact and looking at it and saying, was that the actual impact? So we're taking all of our payroll numbers, digging through those and making sure before we put any projections on a 1% for this year, that we can have an accurate number out there to the right. At this point, I think we're safe in saying, before we get too much further, that the impact of a 1% certified raise, if you can see that, is about $2.5 million. Impact of the classified is about $1 million. So those together, a 1% raise for classified certified employees, you're looking at roughly $3.5 million on the budget. And then you also have the step increases, so we'll be evaluating those, looking at how many employees we currently have on each step of the scale, how many of those are topped out, and what does that look like. And we have historically been able to balance that out a bit with any turnover, and so we'll be digging into those numbers in the next couple of weeks as well. The $7.2 million number, this is the ELA textbook adoption. We have meetings scheduled with Ms. Jackson and her department and their team, and we've asked them to bring us scalable approaches there. What's the best case scenario from their perspective, and then what are options if the budget does not allow for a full purchase. Again, once we meet with you guys, we'll have detailed versions of what the components of that are. Health insurance, we know that this $1.5 million, I think our general feeling is that the state will probably increase the percent on health insurance. What we did in lieu of that, or before that happened, is we took, just after open enrollment for this current year, looked at the number of employees that we have that have signed up, and there's an increase, which is a good thing. We're covering more employees' health insurance. And then there's also some movement within plans. And so looking at that, what we felt like is, to be safe, this is assuming no rate increase from the state, we need to allocate an additional $1.5 million for our health insurance for next year. That information will become a little clearer at our spring fiscal workshop with the state when they, if there is going to be an increase, will let us know at that point. Down below that, you got department, district level areas, program ask, and so what I'll say right now is, we have put a couple on there. We've had a couple of conversations about the technology sustainability initiative, and I think we talked about at the board retreat. Have lots of devices out there in schools, and lots of devices that are aging out, and so how do we as a district sustain the devices to make sure students have and staff have up-to-date devices in the classroom. The bottom part, staffing, is what we're currently working on, and we'll get into that here in just a second. Before I move on, any questions on expenditures or revenues at this point? Anything we've mentioned?
Any questions? Okay.
Okay. So we'll move into the staffing side, and just want to give you an idea here of how this plays out in the district. So our enrollment and transfer office provides us, usually at the 1st of January every year, projections for what, they take rolled-up projections from the principals from every school, and then they also do some detailed analysis and work with MPC, looking at new subdivision growth, transfer patterns, things of that nature. And so they give those numbers to us, and then we run them through ratios and see what does this potentially look like budgetarily. So I thought it was interesting. If you look at the last couple of years, our projected growth, and this is just student enrollment, was for the 2018-19 school year, there was a projected decrease of about 20 students in the district. And then you can see, obviously, that trend has reversed itself and seems to be sustaining itself over the last couple of years. So last year, for current school year, we were projected to have an increase of about 866. And then for next school year at this point, our projected enrollments are looking about 1,042 students higher. So we get asked a lot, what do you do once you get those numbers? So a couple stats here that seem important to us, which is staffing is about 82% of our budget. When you take our staff and the related benefit costs that come along with them. So it's a significant part of our budget. And so how do we go about determining how to send these, how to send this staff out to certain schools? Three parts to that, really. One is enrollment that we just talked about. We look at the enrollment. We look at each school level, each grade level. Then the second part is need. And so that's a part I think that is really important in this, and I think it ties back to superintendent's intent on eliminating disparities. We start with what the BEP suggests. What classroom sizes do they suggest? And then from there, we take those and we look at the different situations at each school. What are the what are the needs at those schools? What are the demographics at those schools? And then that ends up on the sheet being played out in the at-risk percent that you all see. And so what we do based on those at-risk percentages is we decrease the ratio that we send staff out to those schools. And I think, after last year's, we looked at it, and I think I think we were staffing 15 of our 17 high schools at a ratio of 25 to 1 or lower. So that's really significant, and it's really important because it helps, obviously, helps the educational process to have a smaller classroom size. And at the same time, we're monitoring classroom sizes for the current year and being mindful of, are any of these changes we're making over here on the staffing allocation process having a negative impact on the average classroom size. The last part is the program, and that's where we're talking about, what additional staff is allocated in this process, and this comes from things that you know of, think of preschool programs located at schools, special ed programs at schools, or if there are district initiatives like a literacy initiative, some staff may be placed at schools based on those things. So I just want to give you an idea here of how we go about deciding the number of staff that is sent out. I will also say, as you all know, it's not a perfect process, and so I think superintendent and his team has been really willing to listen. If the fall happens and these numbers were not right, we need more teachers, then I think we've shown a willingness to correct our errors there and add staff where needed. This one, I just wanted to point out that, of our total, this is our current fiscal year, and of our total $415 million or so that we spend on staff, the blue shaded area there, and I don't know if you can see the number, but it's about $350 million. Those are what we would term school-based staff. I didn't put all those staffing positions on here just for the sake of the slide, but I think it's 84% of our total personnel cost. The $67 million also, things we did not include would be custodial, maintenance, personnel, security. And so I think, again, this just, it reiterates to me the importance of staffing in this process that we're doing, and the fact, are we turning around and looking at, are we getting the most staff in schools and having impacts on classrooms that we can. The top part just shows you when we meet with principals here in a couple weeks, and I'm not going to read through all those positions, but this just shows you what positions are allocated through the process we're working on right now. Some positions, you'll see counselors, I think on the elementary level, are placed, not allocated through this, so that's why they're missing. But essentially, it's the same type of assistant principal, teacher, counselor, clericals. And so we get to the bottom. How are the formulas developed? Really, the way we approach it is once we get the enrollment numbers, run them through the current formulas, then we turn around and look at what is the potential impact on the classroom setting, the teacher-student interaction. Is that a positive or a negative one? And then does what this potentially looks like, is this tied to the district's strategic plan? And then if so, the last thing we would look at is okay, how do we make this work budgetarily? The point of that is just to show that we approach it from, we are an educational organization here, not a financial one. And so while finances are important and we have to have the money to make this work, we start out with the strategic plan and what is at the end of the day impacting students in the classroom. That's the staffing side of things. I'll be glad to take any questions on that at this point, or I can talk through. I have one slide on the looking ahead, and we can take any questions there at that point. So, any staffing related?
Any questions on staffing? Okay, go ahead.
Madam Chair, may I ask?
Certainly.
Joe, I know we made some changes to the slide presentation. That I think we didn't get it transferred over into the slide, this slide presentation. So, yes. Unless somebody's seeing something different from.
I think ours is a little different.
Yeah. So if we could, after the meeting, whatever, make sure
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I meant.
Because you had some additional slides in there we talked about that didn't get into the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Thomas. I meant to mention that up front. So yeah, we will get a copy of this to staff to send out. So I apologize I know there were a couple additions we had, and I changed a couple slides, so I apologize for that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Norman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Joe. I want to give you a hypothetical and just, give me some general outline of how you all would approach a staffing question like this. And so the hypothetical is we've got a big school, say it's a middle school, and it has, and we know there's overcrowding issues that are involved. When it comes to, and there's some back and forth from the principals and the community and so on and so forth. So how do you all, how do you start with trying to solve the problem or reduce the friction or whatever's going on, which a lot of times it seems like it's the classroom, the sizes of the classroom, how many kids are in the classroom, that kind of thing. And so how does how's this start? How do you all approach this?
Yeah, I can speak to it from my seat, and if Bob or Ron, if any of you guys want to jump in, feel free to. I normally hear about this, I believe, after that principal has reached out to their grade level director and indicated we have an issue. We've got 35 or whatever the number may be, and we can't have class like that. And then I believe what happens next would be they would engage with staff, Mr. Thomas and his staff, and Dr. Reiswick, and they look at those numbers, and this frequently happens once school starts, because as good a job as our transfer enrollment office does in projecting enrollments, and as we try to do with the ratios, it's not always going to be right. So my experience in that has been, we'll see that process play out that I just described, and then we'll be told, hey, we're going to have to add X number of teachers to make this situation function better at this school. And so we'll add unbudgeted staff at that point to that school.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, given this hypothetical, here we are in February, we know what we've been dealing with for the whole school year. And so this process will start taking place real soon, if not already, I'm assuming.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
we are, and again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but we just last week, and we'll share this with the board as well. We looked at the secondary level, all of our core classes, and we have a list of what those are, and at the elementary level, grade by grade. And we trying to keep an eye on how many students are in each of these classes, and making sure that nothing we do here is going to negatively impact that. At the end of the day, we still don't know who's going to show up at the door in August, and so we'd like to build some flexibility into the budget. And you recall last year, I think we ended up having, was it 4 reserve positions we were able to squeeze into the budget? The intent of those is to also help out with this. If we get to August, several more students show up at a school, then we hopefully we have a reserve number of positions to build into the budget that the superintendent and his team can allocate out to take care of these problems. I'm not sure if I'm answering the last part of your question.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. Thank you.
Yep.
And I know that there were some schools last year that in the smoothing process, they did not get all the positions that they truly needed. So I would hope that we could address that and be sure we specifically look at those.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. And we're actually have a meeting this week to kind of fine tune some of that. And you're right. Last year we capped losses or gains. So if a school's enrollment was projected, or their at-risk percentage projection was going to punitively impact their number of staff, we said we're not going to allow them to lose more than 2, because first of all, we know that a loss of 2 is a big deal to a school, but hopefully keeping them from losing 4 or 5 is lessens that impact. But then secondly, it also gives us room to make sure that enrollment projection plays out correctly in the fall.
And of course, I'm concerned about the ones that didn't get the
Yeah, I
staff,
know
the
we've talked
positions they
about
needed,
that,
so.
yeah. And so last year, we ran into that. We had a couple schools that were, again, in areas of the county that are growing, and their projection was above 2, and we capped it at 2. And yeah, we're fine tuning that number as we speak, and I think there's a happy medium between if it projects a high school needing 7 positions. I think there's maybe something between 2 and 7 we can do. The far side of that is, what if you budget and add 7 positions to that staff, and those kids don't show up in the fall, and then you've got 3 teachers that maybe, so we're trying to find that happy landing area in there. But yeah, we are working on that, and we'll communicate that out soon.
Right, okay, Ms. Babb.
I totally appreciate how hard y'all's job is and everything y'all do, and so I'm not trying to make your job harder, but I do look at the fact that we are dealing with, we don't control the money that we get, and it's coming from outside places, but I think a lot of times we don't show what we're not funding because we don't have the money. And I don't know sometimes if there's a way to show, like, we all know we don't have enough nurses, we don't have enough counselors, we don't have enough social workers, that if we could show that what we're not funding, if we funded, I think we'd all like a nurse in every school, a social worker in every school, to be able to show the county, this is what we're asking you for, but this is everything we're not asking you for, to actually do the things you say you want us to do for kids. I mean, I was on the campaign trail with a lot of the people that are in county offices now, and mental health was talked about a lot. I mean, everybody thinks about it. But I don't think sometimes they're seeing what we're not doing because we're trying to work in the confines of a realistic budget. And I also see this, and Mr. McPherson was very kind to send me some information about like technology needs, things that we just expect the parent groups to fund at our schools. And I think sometimes that needs to be shown, what we are not funding but is in our schools. And, we've got things like these legislative mandates coming down where we have to use computers for testing, but the school system and the funding bodies are not funding that. So once again, I'm not trying to make y'all's jobs harder, but I do think there's a whole side to this that our funding bodies don't ever see, because y'all are trying to work so hard to get a realistic budget.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good point. And I think it reminds me a little bit of the conversations we've had recently, and I know with the coalition group, they have been great advocates and have asked us, what do you need? Tell us what you need. Don't tell us what you think you can make work because of your limited resources. So yeah, we can certainly sit down and try to come up with a list to try to at least get started on one.
And I mean, I think we're good stewards to try to work within the money that we're going to get, but I think sometimes they need to see what we're not funding.
Right.
Great, thank you. Ms. Owen?
Last year, we talked about this same thing, and I requested that we have those 2 budgets so that we could compare. And the board got those 2 budgets, but they weren't presented. So the community didn't get to see that information, and commissioners didn't get to see that information. And so what I would really like to see is that same thing, but presented so that everyone sees both of those versions of the budget. That would be really helpful.
Is that, if I remember correctly, that was the second version was the version of without removing any revenue limit on it, and just what expenditure-wise, what do we need?
What we really need.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to be able to articulate, this is what's in the budget, but if we could have a nurse at every school, this is what the cost would be, that sort of thing, so.
Okay, yeah, we can certainly put that together.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, would you like to go ahead with the dates?
Yeah, just one last slide, and there aren't specific days because some of these are still to be determined, but the top one there, community budget discussion, we need to have a meeting. I know it's getting short time window here, but I think last year it was 1st of March or so that we met with the community out at Northwest Middle. So having conversations now about, what are the details of this, where can we meet, when can we meet, and to get some community feedback on the process. Staffing meetings with principals, I referred to this earlier. the week after next, I think the week beginning February the 10th, HR is starting individual meetings with principals to discuss next year's staffing, and they have several deadlines that are built in as far as, postings of positions and priority schools, and so we want to make sure we meet all of those deadlines. Monitoring and updating the revenue, it goes back to what I said earlier. As soon as we get some idea of what we're looking at, then we'll communicate that to Mr. Thomas, and he can communicate that to the board. And then in the meantime, we're just continuing to compile the expenditure budget. And once we get something together that we can discuss, we'll reach out to you guys and hopefully have you come in one by one, and we can talk through and listen to concerns and get back and get started on a final budget.
Okay. Any questions on that portion? Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Babb, we'll turn to you for public forum.
Okay, first on public forum, Gordon Gibson. And if you'll please state your name and county of residence.
I'm Gordon Gibson. I'm a resident of Knox County, a resident in city of Knoxville at 523 North Bertrand, which is an address at which a prior school board built the lovely Park Junior High School. You come to see me, principal's office. So I really appreciated the presentation by Mr. Hartzell and Ms. Cook about discipline. I want to do a closer study of the data presented. Very pleased to see and hear about greater reliance on restorative practice, restorative learning centers. This was the intention of those of us from the public who volunteered to work with school personnel in developing new discipline policies and standards and guidelines. Was concerned to see apparently some rise in out-of-school suspensions, because our feeling was, in looking at discipline, that out-of-school suspensions really were an enemy of good learning. It took the student out of their normal classroom, obviously necessary in some instances. If it's, a fighting issue, need to be somewhere else dealing with whatever prompted that. But real reticence to see heavy reliance on out-of-school suspension, because it does interrupt the educational process. So I'll be taking a closer look at those data. I was also concerned to see considerable differential school to school in some of those statistics, and I hope that will change. I suspect that's something that is going to get Ms. Cook's attention to a great extent. So thank you for the work. Thank you for the information. We haven't had much information for a while, and it's good to get this data, but I want to take a closer look. Thank you.
Lance McCold, and state your name and place of residence. And our clock is not working, so I'm just going to do my timer, and I'll just try to give you a fair warning.
All right. Good evening. I'm Lance McCold in Knox County. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Superintendent Thomas. I am really glad that we've finally seen some statistics of discipline data. The last report was in May of 2018, like 20 months ago. There's not any place in which this kind of lack of reporting is acceptable. I don't know who's responsible for it, but this needs to be better. How are you going to monitor what's going on if you don't get reports but every 2 years? You know, my suggestion about that is that that those data should be reported by your evaluations and assessment department. They should be done on a calendar where they are, you know, they know when they're done, and they don't require Mr. Hartzell or Ms. Cook. You know, the data is the data. We need to be able to see those data, and they don't, you know, that's not, it's like reporting performance data about, you know, what grades the kids get. It's facts. So we should see that, and there's no reason it shouldn't happen on a schedule so the community can see it. I would frankly like to see it every semester. After every semester, we see what's going on, because Mr. Thomas and the board has made a priority of, you know, one of your goals is eliminating disparities. But if you don't have the data, you don't know what's going on. And you don't have the data. It's been almost 2 years since the last time you got the report. So, you know, let's put it down. And if something's important, I don't, you know, you watch your gas tank, because it's important what happened. If we really care about the disparities that we say we care about, let's monitor them. Let's monitor them report on them after every semester, so we know what's going on and we can start to figure out what the problem is, whether it's a few problem kids or it's a systematic thing. You know, let's act like we're taking this seriously. I know that there's really good people who really care about this, that are working on this. Ms. Cook's brought a fresh look to it, and she's committed to it. I know other people in the staff are, but let's follow it so that we can get it, so we can get things done. The presentation by Mr. Hartzell was disappointing in a couple of ways. One, we are the same place we were 4 years ago. I mean, if you compare the beginning, the 2015-16 with 2018-19, we got the same suspensions, pretty much the same racial and other characteristics. Not much evidence we've accomplished anything in all those years. And now that is a place where we have failed our students. We have failed our goals. So I'm very disappointed in that. Mr. Hartzell did not report on disparities. I studied that data, and you can't exactly get it out of there, but if you look at the breakdown of how many suspensions there are by racial group and disabilities, they haven't changed either. So, and the population of our schools has risen a little bit, so the disparity rates are not much changed either. You know, it's like, it's nice of us to say good things when we talk about the strategic plan. We say this is what we're committed to, but if you're really committed to it, you track it and you do something about it. Find out what's not working, figure out how to fix it. You know, I guess one last thought is that we track the cost of lots of things, but I would like to have an idea of how much money we're spending actually working on disparities as an issue. It's one of the 3 priorities in the strategic plan. We ought to be able to pretty clearly track what we're spending on our priorities, if nothing else. So thank you very much for letting me speak. I hope these are helpful comments.
Thank you. That concludes public forum.
Thank you. Okay, now we have board forum. Let's start with Ms. Christie. Ms. Hill.
Congratulations to Carnes Middle School girls basketball. They won the league and they won the tournament undefeated, and they're going now into a regional tournament beginning next week. So I'm very proud of them.
Right, Ms. Babb. Mr. Norman.
Happy birthday to my wife. I'll be home in about 20 minutes.
Great. Ms. Owen. Ms. Satterfield.
Now, I'd just like to thank all my principals who have gone out their way to say Happy Board Appreciation Day to us this week. So thank you, principals, if you're watching.
And Mr. Kelly. Okay, thank you very much. We are adjourned.